Symbols. Symbolism in literature. Super fun. We're going to talk about that right now. And it's kind of it's a fun aspect of literature to talk about it because we're pretty familiar with symbols just in our everyday life because we're used to having symbols all around us. You know, we obviously know what this peace sign means because we've seen it enough times. And there's a million other symbols all around that make our lives easier, like stop signs and check marks and restroom signs and green lights or red lights, the wedding ring, which symbolizes sort of eternal love, all kinds of symbols we use in our life. So what is a symbol? Well, it's any person, place, or object that represents something more than itself. You know, the wedding ring is not just a circular band of gold. It represents this union that you've committed to. It's really anything in literature that suggests more than its literal meaning. It goes beyond what it literally is and begins to mean something else. It's a mechanism to change something tangible into something intangible. So tangible is when you can touch it, you can feel it, you can see it, sense it, taste it, using any of your five senses to figure out what this thing is, like a tree, and turning that image of the tree to represent something that's not tangible. So an author might very readily use the image of a tree in winter, which is kind of hibernating, is dormant, there's no real signs of life, all the sap is deep within the core of the tree, it's covered in snow, it appears dead. So it might refer to that image of the tree as being a time of death, a time of hibernation, lack of life, as opposed to springtime with the new buds coming out, the new young life, the baby animals being born, would represent a time of life, hope, rebirth, renewal. You know, coming out of the winter, out of that horrible time of privation, death, and hunger into the time of plenty, and the time of warmth, into the time of new life. So taking something tangible, like a tree or a plant, and using it to mean something intangible, like death or birth. Authors can take advantage of conventional meanings of symbols, ones that we're all familiar with, or kind of think of intuitively, or at least have kind of an awareness of, just through lack of, or through use with these symbols, like the Christian fish, which is an ancient symbol, actually, which came from early Christians back at a time when it was dangerous to be a Christian, who would mark this image in the sand just as they were talking to people, and if that person knew what was going on, they could see, and if they were a Christian themselves, then they would see that this is a fellow Christian and they could commiserate. But if they didn't know, if they weren't a Christian, they wouldn't know this sign, and so then the marker was safe. But that's where it comes from. Also having to do with Jesus being a fisher of men. Anyway, pretty universal symbol that we're familiar with through years of use. Same with midnight. You know, midnight kind of intuitively is a time shrouded in mystery. It's dark. It's a time of change. We go from one day to the next, so we're literally transitioning from one day to the next. So it can be a time of transition. It can be a time of renewal, of changing. You know, you get the vampire stories with midnight, there's clock striking 12, and the vampire coming out. Same with homes, houses. You know, houses are traditionally, or the home is traditionally a symbol of nurturing, of being taken care of like home cooking and your mother there to take care of you, and safety. You know, I'm going home. This is not a safe place for me. I need to go home. And you'll see home being used as a positive, nurturing, caring kind of symbol. So these are conventional symbols that authors can take advantage. or they may establish the meaning for the symbols through the context of their writing. So we see this in Soldier's Home by Hemingway, which, if you think of the title, Soldier's Home, is kind of an odd title, right? Because soldiers typically are not home. If they're a soldier, they're at war or in the field. And so here's a soldier at home. It's kind of already a little jarring. And it's about a soldier trying to go home, but he's finding that he can't. So the home in that case is not the nurturing, welcoming beacon of safety for Krebs, is it? It's where he doesn't fit. It's where he has grown out of. And we particularly see it in the bacon hardening on the plate that Krebs looks at while he's listening to his mother while they're having that terribly awkward conversation. And again, bacon, you know, the smell of bacon, for most of us is a warm, homey, nurturing, oh my goodness, yay kind of feeling, right, or smell. And seeing it harden on the plate is the congealing of it, is the opposite of its kind of welcoming or nurturing qualities. And that's what's happening with his home, with his life there. Similarly, if you think about the American flag, which is a conventional symbol of this country, of patriotism, of freedom, of pride, when we see it in a tattoo on the belly of the blonde in Battle Royale, and we see what the town's leading citizens are doing to her, then that image of the American flag takes on more complicated connotations, doesn't it? We need to kind of think it's no longer just, you know, these positive representations. It's got some kind of ominous attachment to it now. So in that case, Ellison is kind of warping the idea of the American flag into a theme or an idea that suits his purposes in the telling of his story. So we can arrive at symbols through association. Things can come to mean certain things to us, like, you know, we don't really have any real inherent use for a snow globe from Seattle. But when we take it home and then look at it years later and turn it upside down and shake it and look at the Space Needle and so forth, it's reminding us of a time that we enjoyed Seattle, right? It's taking us back to the memory and the feelings we had when we were in Seattle. That's why we buy souvenirs. Same with, you know, the old teddy bear, right? It's not like we still sleep with the teddy bear and we need this teddy bear to cling to. I mean, most of us anyway, in order to go to sleep. You know, the thing's all ratty and dusty now. We really don't need it, but it represents something to it. It has come to mean something. It's come to mean our childhood, or maybe someone who gave it to us, or the love we felt as children, or the security that it brought to us as children. So it's come to mean something to us, so we keep it. And we see this in The Flowers by Walker. Again, she calls her story The Flowers, so we're meant to pay careful attention to the flowers in the story. And she ends the story with the single wild pink rose that is beside the body of the man that she discovers. And so the rose kind of transcends just the beauty of being a flower and becomes a symbol of respect and tribute. So using the context of the story, you should always use the context of the story to figure out what's happening with the symbols. But authors can create symbols just through the telling of the story. Why do we even bother with symbols? Well, because authors use symbols to deepen their work, make it richer and more meaningful. So the more we pay attention to the symbols, the more we get out of the story. Writers may also use symbolism to allude to a mood or feeling without coming out and stating that particular emotion. You know, rather than saying he was really happy, it might be just better to say that he sees the sunshine spreading out on the brand new day. it's more subtle, it's more artful, it's more meaningful. So a writer might use the symbol of a lily, for example, to suggest purity, or a ray of sunshine to represent hope. Again, those tangibles becoming intangible. Okay, here we have an excerpt of Shakespeare's As You Like It, where he uses symbolism, and this will probably be familiar to you. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Okay, so he's using the stage to represent life, right? And the players are the people, and exits and entrances are births and deaths, and playing of different parts is simply the different roles that someone plays as he or she goes through life, right? Here's Blake's Ah, Sunflower. Ah, sunflower weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime where the traveler's journey is done. So here the sunflower now is representing a human who is watching the passing of the sun. The years go by, right? And who seeks that sweet golden clime, that climate that's perfect, that place that's perfect where he can rest, basically looking for never-ending life, right? Or Sarah Teasdale's Wild Asters. In the spring I asked the daisies if his words were true, and the clever, clear-eyed daisies always knew. Now the fields are brown and barren, bitter autumn blows, and of all the stupid asters, not one knows. So, again, clear representation of spring as youthful and optimistic, clever, clear-eyed, all-seeing, as opposed to autumn. The transition would occur probably in the brown and barren fields, but then bitter autumn blows, the winter is setting in, and the flowers are all dead, so they're not giving her any clue as to her love life or anything else. So symbolism gives the writer freedom to add double meanings to his work. A literal one, obviously, that's self-evident, and the more symbolic one, whose meaning is far more profound than the literal one. So if we were to read Colette's The Hand, and just think about it as a woman, lying in bed beside her husband with his sleeping hand right beside her, and she's watching it, that would be one thing, but Colette imbues it with so much symbolism, it comes to mean something sinister and ominous, and it represents the rashness of this young bride's decision to marry this man that she barely knows, and she sentenced herself to a life of who knows what, and the hand becomes just in the way she describes it becomes actually quite terrifying. Symbolism in literature evokes interest in readers, hopefully, because you can find opportunity to get an insight into the writer's mind and how he views the world or how he thinks of common objects and actions, having broader implications, certainly like Colette's Hand. We see it all through literature. If you think about Jealous Husband Returns in Form of Parrot by Butler, here he's taken this insanely jealous man who dies a jealous death and comes back as a parrot who is still as jealous, and he can still not communicate with his wife, and it's all represented by his being in a cage. He's kind of caged physically as well as symbolically throughout the whole story, and you know that Butler does it purposefully. You also want to pay attention to colors. Colors mean things, and again, a lot of this is intuitive. So if the author mentions that something is a particular color, kind of pause and reflect. Colors often represent emotions. Of course, red is very passionate. It can be love or it can be anger. It's kind of a bold, dramatic color as opposed to blue, which can represent serenity or peacefulness, but it can also mean sadness or even fear. Think about yellow, quite a positive color, often referring to sunshine and light and a new day and spring and happiness. Greens, often used in reference to nature, same with browns. So, hearkening back to natural things, getting close to nature. Although if there's more browns and darker colors, it might be the death of nature. Again, you have to sort of pay attention to the context in which the colors appear. And if a color is repeated, then the author is saying, pay attention. And we've already run into this in our readings in A Sorrowful Woman. I don't know if you noticed, but there is a color in there that Godwin mentions twice. And it's the gray sweaters. Right at the beginning of the story and again at the end when she's in that frenzy of creativity right before the end of the story. And the colors are gray, the sweaters are gray. So what might gray mean in that context? Probably not too optimistic. So pay attention to what colors the authors are using when they're describing them, because they don't have to describe it. I mean, it's their choice, right? They don't have to talk about anything being colorful. So when they do, they're doing it with purpose. There's some common symbols that keep coming up in literature, like water. Water is kind of an elemental symbol, life-giving, life-affirming. It can be a symbol of purification or rebirth, like a baptism. Often, if a river is mentioned, that can refer to the river of life, or the passage of time through life. But it can also be ominous, as in a drowning or death. So again, pay attention to what the context is when the author mentions water. Same with fire. Obviously, fire is dangerous and frightening and can cause death, but it can also cause rebirth. Remember the phoenix that gets burned up in the fire, but then a baby phoenix rises up through the ashes, so there's a rebirth, there's a new life, there's a new chance, a second chance. So, sometimes there might be a fire in your story, and then a character learns something. That would be the author using that phoenix interpretation of fire. Night is really interesting because there's a lot going on at night, right? It can be seen as the end of the road, as a transition between 2 days. So it could be a time of change. Obviously, with shadows and dark, it's a time of mystery. But if the author is mentioning stars or moon or planets or comets or anything like that, or even lamps, street lights, then there's more of a romantic kind of connotation, there's light at the end of the tunnel kind of idea, that there's safety in the light, that even though you're surrounded by darkness, there might be something positive ahead. So a light might be seen as something safe in something that's otherwise very dangerous. Day, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's a new day, the sun has come up, I can see, which means I can understand. There's illumination or understanding or opportunities or knowledge. It's a time to start over. When you look at, when you actually see light referred to in stories, and you'll see this in A Dollhouse, because the author makes particular mention of light. Light is often seen as enlightenment or truth or awareness. It can even have a holy connotation, being brought into the light. And, that's as opposed to darkness, which, again, is mysterious, foreboding. If your character is hidden in the dark, has shadows cast over his face, you can only see part of him because of the darkness, then, there might be something that that he's hiding. Maybe he's lying, or maybe he's hiding something from you. So pay attention to what kind of setting the authors are using and what those settings mean. So in terms of detecting symbols, well, how do we go about it? It may not be possible to detect all the symbols in a work, and that's one of the nice things about working together as a class on all of this literature, because we'll have lots of brains working on this, discovering symbols. But just be careful, because not all literary interpretation, you do have to interact with the work. And not everything you may see as a symbol is one that the author actually intended. So just be careful that you're not reading into the work. You really want to find evidence that supports what you think is a symbol before you actually acknowledge it as one. So the first thing to think about is the theme of the story. And we'll talk more about theme in literature, but it's basically what the author is saying about life or the human condition. You know, it's sort of a limited subject and how the author feels about it, if we think back to English 1. So if this author is writing about the loss of innocence, pay attention to things that are dying, things that are decaying, things that are old or tired or used or transitioning, to try and figure which symbols are reinforcing that theme. Watch for repetition. And this is true beyond symbols. If an author repeats something, it's because the author means to repeat something. So the author is saying, reader, I've repeated, pay attention to what I've just said twice or 3 times or however many times I've repeated it. And we see this a lot in A Sorrowful Woman when we hear the husband being so understanding. Godwin repeats that phrase, I don't know how many times, it's 6 or 7. And so she repeats it so much that you have to ask yourself, why is she saying this over and over again? Again, the gray sweaters in A Sorrowful Woman, Godwin's tale. You might be forgiven for not paying much attention to the grayness of the sweater for a young child, a tender golden child of 3, has a gray sweater. But when she does it at the end as well, then Godwin is saying this is important. Consider why certain details are included. Again, authors do not have to include anything they don't want to. And so in the very short story, The Flowers by Alice Walker, it's not even a page long, but we have this indication in paragraph 3. Maya watched the tiny white bubbles disrupt the thin black scale of soil and the water that silently rose and slid away down the stream. Okay, so it's got water, maybe something to do with the passage of time, passage of life, but we've also got these color references, right? White bubbles and black scale of soil. White and black. What might that have to do with the story? So you know that Walker is using those details really purposefully. She's giving you a clue, a heads up. Oops, I want to go this way. There we go. Note particular placement of objects or ideas. Titles are really important. Any kind of reference you see going back to the title is important. So in The Flowers, every flower that's mentioned, you should pay attention to. When she's kind of wandered far enough away and it's noon, kind of another time of change, and we start to see words like strangeness and not as comfortable, and there's a different new kind of flower. So watch when we see this reiteration of the title or the images in the title. Or if you see something set apart in its own paragraph, or set apart in its own paragraph. Like the bacon hardening on the plate. It's one paragraph. Krebs looked at the bacon fat hardening on his plate. So Hemingway is saying to us, this little image, this little detail is a symbol for something. I want you to pay attention to it because it's that meaningful. It's telling you something about what I'm saying about the world in this story and our protagonist. I did it again, I went back. And use common sense. Again, don't try and read into the story more than that's there. Make sure you have evidence that's reflected in the title, in the theme, in other images and other symbols that the author is using to tell his or her story. So enjoy. Think of it as a little bit of a treasure hunt. The more you read the stories, the more you're going to get out of it. And when you're using your close reading skills, which you're practicing really carefully, I know, you will become better and better at finding symbols. And if you want to find out more, if you want to read more, go to this website here, which gives you a dictionary of symbols in literature, and there's all kinds of them online. The only thing I would caution you is be careful. Just because an author uses a moon in his story doesn't necessarily mean that it is exactly what one of these dictionaries says a moon means, because authors can manipulate the rules too. But it's not a bad idea to kind of get an overview of what kinds of symbols are used. And there are some pretty common ones that keep cropping up in literature. But as I said, there's other ones that authors create within the context of their own writing. So good luck. Use your common sense. Think about what the author is trying to say, and look for those symbols that are reinforcing that message. Enjoy.